after e4, d6, d4, and early g6. As we know, we've seen in previous videos, we're gonna go through h4. We're gonna play h4. So after bishop g7, h5, and we're gonna see in this video some lines that we haven't seen before. So first, let's start with this one. This is really bad. How do we deal with this? Okay, take, queen takes, king takes, and now h6. The bishop and the knight are not enough attacking this pawn because we also have a bishop and a rook attacking here. So the bishop has to move away. It will have to be bishop f8 because if the bishop goes, let's say, to f6, trying to stay more relevant on this diagonal, white will play f4 with the idea of playing e5 and trapping the bishop. And it's too late for our opponent to simply play e5. I mean, look at how terrible this looks like. Knight f3 comes now, we're still threatening the same thing, and this is now unstoppable. Our opponent is not going to be able, if he takes us, we're going to push e5 no matter what. If black develops the knight and puts extra defense over the square e5, remember that our opponent has lost the right to castle. So knight c3 comes, and now we're threatening to win this pawn eventually because you can threaten knight d5, take that bishop and win the pawn in e5. If bishop to g4, trying to get rid of our amazing knight, bishop to e3, attacking the pawn in c5. The best move by black will be pawn takes in f4, and now we have to take back. We don't have to worry about bishop takes. The knight will be amazing because then you reunite the pawns and our opponent loses the bishop pair. Our opponent can't really put the king anywhere safe. Can't castle, can't go to c7 to get the rook out. The only thing left to do will be try to, I don't know, develop this knight e7 and try to play a normal move, but it's just too late because you're going to play e5. And black taking knight doesn't work because when you take the bishop, you're attacking something else. We have a Zwischenzug. And so in this case, what if instead of knight e7, black first takes the knight? Oops, the pawn was in e4. Black first takes the knight. We take back, and now black can play knight e7 because we can't play e5. We don't have the knight in f3 attacking e5 to support that. But now white just plays knight b5. It's too late for our opponent to do anything. There's nothing. I don't know if black tries to develop the rook or something. It's not really not doing anything, but you long castle, position evaluated +5, because when the king moves, you're going to be able to play knight d6 and fork the king and rook. If instead, in this position, our opponent tries to get rid of our incredible bishop and suggests a swap, so that, I don't know, black can potentially, not now, but after a6 and kicking away the knight, black can play king c7, rook out, and play a normal endgame. Here, we mess up with black's plan. Castle. King can't go to c7 now because the knight. c8 will lock the king in. Besides, after taking this bishop, knight takes back, the knight to d6, we're making a fork to this king, we're attacking this pawn. Then you can play knight g5. I mean, come on, it's a fantastic position. If king goes to e8, same thing, right? You take this one, knight takes, but this is even worse because knight c7 wins even more material. You're going to a winning endgame. So in this position of c5, this is a type of move that it's pretty rare, but it does happen sometimes. They want to trade everything. You take, and queen takes, king takes, and now h6. So after bishop f8 instead, okay, knight to c3. Let's just show this line very quickly so we can move on to the other topic. Knight f6, knight f3. After bishop to g4 attacking the knight just goes to g5, completely winning endgame. You're also going to play f3 later on. You cannot ask for more. If instead of bishop g4, black plays a6, stopping our knight b5 idea. Okay, knight g5 comes now. The king has to move again. e5 attacks the knight. All forced moves. The knight can't move anywhere. Knight to g8 is the only move. Knight to d5 comes. The king can't move because you're going to play knight c7 or knight to f7. Okay, so let's go to something more serious now. So g6, the early g6, you play h4. Bishop to g7, h5. And now let's look at this idea. Knight c6, without moving c6 or c5 or knight to d7, knight to c6. This is a very popular move in this position, and it's double attack over this square d4, and obviously you need to protect it. And if you play knight f3, the opponent wants to play bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen. And it's kind of like, your opponent is taking the lead. So in order to stop all of that, what you do when you see the early knight c6 is this move, d5. Don't let black take the initiative. So now the knight moves h6. This is coming anyway. Bishop f8 only move. Not bishop f6 because, okay, you just play bishop e2 and you have a plan of playing f4. Why bishop e2? It's important because if you don't play bishop e2, if you play f4 straight away, our opponent might play bishop g4 attacking the queen, and he may actually get safe from there. It's still okay for white, but it's not the best way to continue. He also has knight to g4, and he's got quite an attack over these two. Your bishop isn't really defending h6, so you don't want to do anything too rushed. Just play bishop e2 to put extra defense over the square g4, and now f4 is a real threat. And we're going back to the pattern, with the bishop in f6 as explained in the previous example. Okay, so in this position, bishop to f8, knight to c3, c6, challenging our very strong center, bishop e2, ignore it. Okay, c takes d5, take with the pawn. Now this pawn is very strong because it's protecting e6 and c6. You're planning to play something like bishop b5 at some point. But let's see, e6 now, for example, how do you meet it? f4, attacking a piece. And now black starts to realize that the knight c6, the early knight c6 move was not good. The knight has to move. There are no squares except d7. And now you take here. Pawn takes back. f5. Even though it's attacked by two different pawns. Although, well, taking with this pawn is terrible because you got this check, right? And then the king moves, and then, you can take it from there. It's completely over. So, at this point, if black takes with the e pawn, because we're planning to take in g anyway, and ruin everything. Here, white plays queen to d4, attacking the rook, trapping it. Knight g to f6 seems to be stopping everything, but now bishop to g5, double attack on that knight. The only way to apparently defend it will be king f7 is a suicide. You got the bishop, so it seems like bishop e7 holds everything together. But now long castle. You're playing like Paul Morphy. Black's move is queen to b6, desperate for a swap. In a moment we have such a strong initiative. Queen to h4, denying that, and after castle, this king is in huge trouble. Our king is completely safe. And now white plays bishop to c4, check. King moves, best thing to do. Well, okay, you can't really push the pawn because you've got more attackers. So king h8, knight to f3. Best move, knight to e5, attacking this the tremendous bishop in c4, threatening a swap with this very strong knight. Because, yeah, it doesn't look like with this knight is very strong. But when we're done with all the swappings, this knight might jump to very good squares because the pawn structure of our opponent is really stupid. Rook h2 e1, as if nothing was happening. Let's make an example. Let's say knight back to c6. You can take this. And it's going to be checkmate. This is check. Whatever our opponent does, we're going to sacrifice the queen. Bishop takes, you can sacrifice the queen. Rook takes. Rook goes back here, check, and then mate. Right, so that was an example to explain what the plan is. If black plays move like bishop to d7, okay, your idea is to play knight to d5, finalizing the attack on f6. Even though it looks weird, because it looks like the knight can take our knight in d5 and also protect the bishop behind. So like it looks like there's nothing. Let's make an example. Knight takes, okay, take, knight takes, queen takes. The thing is, we are threatening this, and this. So in this position, what happens after the more obvious... Oh, by the way, knight takes bishop is no reason to see that, because it's the same thing. You take this knight, and you swap everything, and then sacrifice the queen and checkmate. So what happens after knight takes in f3 with an attack on the queen? This makes much more sense. But still, take this. Comes with check. So you don't have to worry about the queen, and still... exactly same position as before, it's leading to checkmate. This leads us to the final line, and then I think it's going to be the end, or maybe not, the end for the Pirc chapter, the Pirc saga. Now there's probably going to be another video, just one more. Okay, anyway, g6, and now h4, Bishop g7, h5. We're going to look at this move, which we haven't seen. Knight to d7. Okay, carry on with h6. And after bishop f8, knight to c3. So now e5. It looks like finally, after so many variations where we played e5 first, attacking the knight in f6 and causing that chaos and winning advantage every time, it looks like this time our opponent preserved the knight in g8, moved the knight in d7 first so that they can play e5. So finally, there's a position where we allowed black to play the pawn to e5. However, before we do that, we are going to go through this. Let's go through c6 now. We play now g4. Here's what you want to do with this pawn. In such position, you see the knight is not in f6, so you don't really need to play that e5 or f4 type of idea. Here you play g4, you want to support the pawn in h6 so that this piece is on the... You see, if you get the pawn in g5, for example, this knight and the bishop will never develop. It's a joke of a game. So let's see, e5 now, bishop to e3. Obviously, take is favorable for white. b5 with the idea of, just attacking on the queen side. That's the only thing left to do at this point. g5. And this pawn chain is literally like playing with alpha 0. Okay, b4. Knight a4. Nothing to worry. Queen to a5, attacking the knight. b3. The pawn cannot do a discover check. The knight is safe. Nothing to worry. Knight to b6, putting more attack over the knight. Here you take the pawn, which is a bit surprising. You don't have to worry about knight taking your knight. You will just ignore it and take the pawn in d6. The knight has just taken a piece from us. He's not going to be able to go to c3 with an attack on the queen because queen to d4 does this. And there's nothing else here. We are going to recapture the knight eventually. Queen d4 is a threat no matter what. And in this position, the knight just went to b6 and we just took the pawn in e5. What if black simply recaptures and then is threatening to take the knight and break our pawn structure? Looks horrible. Now we have to play knight b2. So bishop to a6 now, best move by black. Here we have to take, because if they take us, then we're in trouble. I mean, not too much, but you're gonna have to take with the king, and it's annoying. Take, queen takes back, obviously. Knight to f3, attacking this pawn. Rook to d8, attacking the queen. Queen to e2. Okay, queen takes, king takes, swapping everything. Are we going to a winning endgame? Yes, because we can take this knight, for example, pawn takes, and then knight c4, we got double attack over here in e5, and this pawn will never be supported by this pawn because, we've got these two monster pawns in g5 and h6. Let's make an example here. What about bishop to d6? Okay, rook h to d1. c5. It looks like there's like quite a chain of pawns now, and they're all defending each other. This stupid bishop being the biggest pawn. Okay, a3. And now either black plays a5, but then we're gonna infiltrate, or if black takes, then we can again infiltrate and put the rook on the 7th rank eventually. If black plays c4 now, then simply take. And now you got double attack here, so that c4 obviously doesn't work. This leads us to the last recap, and then we'll close this video. So g6, h4, bishop g7, h5, knight d7, h6, bishop f8, and now knight c3. So what happens when black plays e5? Not much. Bishop e3. And after knight g to f6, it looks like maybe the black player will be play a normal game, but now we play g4. Do you recognize it? There's a knight in d7 preventing the bishop from attacking the familiar g4 light square. So the knight can't take, and we're threatening g5, right? Let's make an example. Now there's two moves we're going to go through. If, let's say, black plays c5, challenging the strong center, the idea of taking this pawn here, we have to prioritize that. We take this one. Okay, knight takes back. Triple attack actually on g4. Well, g5 has to happen. Knight f to g4 now. Looks scary. But now it's attacking the bishop, so bishop to d2 has to happen. And even though it looks like the black player, is kind of like, well developed, you got lots of pieces attacking the nearby squares, The bishop can go to e7, you can potentially castle, but it's actually a really ugly position. Right? Look how stupid this is. There's a pawn in g5 and h6, it's too strong. This bishop can't really play anywhere meaningful. You can play f4 anytime you want. And our opponent will never castle anywhere safe. Can't castle this side, it's too late to be... I mean, you push c5, so what are you going to do? Castling this side, there's this massive weakness in g7. Let's go on with this potential line, just to see some examples. So knight back to c6. Idea of maybe going to d4. Bishop e2, attacking the knight. And now the knight goes back to e5. Knight to d5. Our position is superior because our opponent has weak dark squares, even though the dark square bishop is still there. Bishop e7. Okay, f4. The knight has to go. Knight to d7. Knight to f3. White played a little bit backwards for a bit. You know, he kept a little bit sleepy looking, but now it's when all the pieces get active. Knight to b6. Bishop to c3. Super strong. And now castle. Queen to d2. Bishop to g4. Developing is just too late. Our position is excellent. We're going to play knight e3 attacking the bishop. The bishop moves. And, well, if the bishop goes anywhere else, we're going to play f5. If instead the bishop goes back, then you can just sacrifice. Pawn takes back, and now long castle is the killer move. Look at this. And in this position, you know, we just played g4 and we saw what happens after the idea of c5, putting a lot of attack over d4. Here, what happens after bishop to e7? Looks like it makes sense. However, g5 happens anyway, and the knight has to go. The only move will be knight to h5, but now rook to h5. Boom! How about that? Pawn takes, queen takes back. And tell me, where is this king gonna castle? Where? Okay, what happens after rook to g8? Knight to f3. c6. But let's look 1 second, let's look at c5 now. How do we react? Same thing, take, but this time we castle long, pinning this knight. Then we're going to play knight a5. You can have fun here. Knight f6. You can do anything you want, literally. It's such a beautiful position. Now I know how the Roman emperors must have felt when they sat on their thrones. They felt just like I feel when I play against the Pirc. So in this position, what if c6, giving some loof to the queen? Okay, well, bishop e2, queen to b6, castle. Queen to a5. Okay, fine. Bishop to c4. We've got an attack here on f7. Rook to f8 stops that for the moment. We take this pawn. Knight takes back. We just take. Take. Rook takes. g6, attacking the rook. When the rook moves, we have a discover check. We're going to promote. If pawn takes, queen g6 pins the rook whilst promoting. And in this position, last mention will be the fact that even if knight doesn't take, but rather black takes with the pawn in this position, just a few moves ago, knight to h4 comes. The idea of playing knight f5. Bishop to c5, knight f5. Oops. Knight f5. Bishop takes. We don't care. We take the pawn. Doesn't matter. We got these two ugly pawns, but this king is on borrowed time. Knight d6, knight g7. You literally play how you wish here. But knight d6 would be better at this point. But even the plan you did before, like bishop to f7, rook takes, knight d6, wins everything.